Imagine you are standing at the edge of a vast plain, just as the sun dips below the horizon. Two paths stretch before you. One is wide, smooth, and lined with gentle lanterns. It promises an easy journey, predictable days, minimal obstacles, and the kind of safety that makes life feel comfortable but ordinary. The other is narrow, twisting, and climbs toward jagged hills cloaked in shadows. It looks dangerous. There are no lights, no guarantees, and no clear end in sight. Most people, when given such a choice, step onto the easy road without hesitation. Yet for some reason, a voice deep inside you whispers, "Take the harder path. See how far you can go." Why would anyone do that? Why would someone trade comfort for difficulty, certainty for risk, or ease for struggle? For centuries, many philosophers believed the answer was simple. They wouldn't. Human beings, they argued, are motivated primarily by one thing: the desire to seek pleasure and avoid pain. This idea, known as the pleasure-pain principle, has shaped entire systems of psychology, economics, and ethics. Epicurus in ancient Greece taught that happiness, the absence of pain, was life's highest aim. Later, thinkers like Jeremy Bentham built theories of utilitarianism around the same assumption: maximize pleasure, minimize suffering, and society will flourish. Even Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, viewed the mind's basic drive as the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. It sounds logical. Hunger hurts, so we eat. Loneliness hurts, so we seek companionship. Praise feels good, so we work to earn it. On the surface, life appears to be a constant negotiation between what attracts us and what scares us. But then there's Friedrich Nietzsche, a man who looked at that neat explanation and said, "That cannot be the whole story." Nietzsche was born in 1844 in Röcken, a small village in Prussia. He grew up in a deeply religious household, lost his father at an early age, and excelled academically, becoming a professor by his mid-20s. Yet despite his academic success, he would abandon a secure career to pursue a path of relentless questioning, a path that made him an outcast in his own time and a revolutionary figure for generations to come. Nietzsche looked at human history, at art, exploration, heroism, and even everyday acts of courage, and saw something that the pleasure-pain principle could not explain. Why would people endure hardship voluntarily? Why would they risk pain, sacrifice safety, and push themselves into danger when they could live quietly and comfortably? Take explorers who sailed across oceans knowing they might never return. Take inventors who spent years in poverty chasing an idea. Take athletes who willingly endure exhaustion, injury, and failure for a goal that might never pay off. None of these choices fit the simple model of maximize pleasure, avoid pain. Nietzsche believed that beneath the human search for comfort lies a far more fundamental force, the will to power, an inner drive not merely to survive, but to grow, to expand, to test one's limits, and to shape the world rather than be shaped by it. The phrase can sound threatening, as though Nietzsche meant that life is only about dominating others. That is one of the biggest misconceptions about his philosophy. The will to power is not simply the hunger for political control, wealth, or military strength. It is something more universal. The basic life force that pushes every living thing to assert itself, to grow, and to overcome resistance. A seed breaking through soil to reach the sun is expressing the will to power. A baby learning to walk, falling again and again but refusing to stop, is driven by the same force. You feel it when you decide to face a fear, to learn a difficult skill, or to pursue a goal that demands more from you than you think you have. It is not about comfort. It is about transformation. Nietzsche's insight was that pleasure and pain are not ultimate goals. They are side effects of a much deeper process. Growth often brings discomfort. Mastery often begins in frustration. Even joy, at its richest, comes after effort and struggle. Imagine a musician practicing a complex piece. The early attempts are clumsy. The fingers ache. Mistakes pile up. If that musician were motivated only by avoiding pain, they would quit. But they keep going because something beyond pleasure drives them. The desire to improve, to master, to become someone capable of more than before. This explains why so many people willingly step into difficult situations, marathons, mountain climbs, demanding careers, and even personal transformations like therapy or public speaking. Pleasure alone cannot explain why they endure pain voluntarily. The will to power can. Nietzsche's life itself demonstrates this philosophy. He was not a man writing about struggle from the safety of comfort. He suffered nearly constant physical pain, severe migraines, near blindness, digestive illnesses, and spent much of his life isolated, misunderstood, and financially unstable. Yet during those years, he produced works that continue to challenge and inspire the world. Thus spoke Zarathustra, beyond good and evil, the genealogy of morality. He once wrote, "You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star." For Nietzsche, chaos, pain, uncertainty, and conflict was not something to avoid, but something necessary for creation. Without hardship, there is no depth. Without resistance, there is no strength. This philosophy directly opposes the modern idea that comfort equals happiness. Nietzsche warned that a society obsessed with eliminating struggle would not produce strong, creative individuals, but rather what he called the last man. The last man is content, but uninspired. He as risk avoids pain and avoids anything that might disturb his safety. He says, "We have invented happiness," but what he calls happiness is really a small, controlled existence where nothing truly changes. Imagine a person who never challenges themselves, who spends each day avoiding difficulty, always choosing the easy task, always avoiding confrontation, always seeking convenience. Their life may feel safe, but over time it also becomes narrow. Their confidence weakens because they never test it. Their sense of possibility shrinks because they never push beyond their limits. For Nietzsche, this was not truly living. It was existing, breathing, eating, and surviving, but never becoming. The will to power is not limited to heroic figures or philosophers. It is present in everyone, waiting to be expressed. You have felt it any time you decided to face a challenge you could have avoided. You felt it the first time you tried to ride a bicycle, the first time you stood up for yourself, the first time you set a goal that scared you. Even if fear accompanied those moments, something deeper pushed you forward, a sense that you could be more, do more, and become stronger. That force is not about seeking comfort. It is about asserting life itself. Human beings are not built merely to seek comfort. We are built to grow. This idea stands at the heart of Nietzsche's claim that the will to power is more fundamental than the search for tout pleasure or the avoidance of pain. But to truly understand why this matters, we need to look more closely at how this drive works in real life, and why it often leads us to choose paths that are far from easy. Pleasure feels good in the moment, but it is temporary and shallow if it is not connected to something larger. Eating a sweet dessert brings a burst of enjoyment, but that feeling fades within minutes. Buying something new might excite you for a day or two, but the satisfaction quickly disappears. Pleasure is like water poured into your hands. It slips away almost instantly. More importantly, a life focused only on comfort and the avoidance of pain tends to shrink rather than expand. When you avoid difficult situations because they might hurt or scare you, you also avoid the growth those situations could bring. You might avoid rejection by never asking for what you want, but then you also avoid the chance to succeed. You might avoid failure by never taking risks, but then you also avoid discovering your true potential. Nietzsche believed that people who cling to comfort alone eventually feel a kind of hidden emptiness. On the surface, they are safe. Deep down, they are restless, because some part of them knows they are capable of more. Why do so many people deliberately choose hard things, things that bring pain, stress, and even fear? Marathon runners rise before dawn to train for months. Mountain climbers willingly face freezing temperatures, hunger, and exhaustion. Students take on demanding degrees that require years of intense work. They are not doing these things to suffer for the sake of suffering. They are doing them because something deeper than Genesis.
Omfort calls to them, the desire to test their strength, to expand their boundaries, to feel the satisfaction of mastering what once seemed impossible.
That satisfaction is not the same as simple pleasure. It is more profound. It comes from transformation. Interestingly, modern research supports Nietzsche's insight. Psychologists have found that people often experience their highest sense of fulfillment, not when life is easiest, but when they are deeply engaged in a challenging activity that stretches their abilities. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, a psychologist known for studying flow, described this state as one in which a person is fully absorbed in what they are doing, balancing skill and challenge. Flow is not about relaxation or comfort. It often requires intense effort, focus, and even frustration. Yet, people report that these experiences, playing a difficult piece of music, solving a complex problem, or competing in a demanding sport, are some of the most rewarding moments of their lives. Similarly, studies on post-traumatic growth show that people who face significant hardships, serious illness, loss, or failure, sometimes emerge stronger, with a deeper appreciation for life and a clearer sense of purpose. Pain, when confronted and used, can lead to growth that simple comfort never provides. History is full of individuals who embraced struggle rather than avoided it. Amelia Earhart chose to attempt dangerous flights when she could have remained a safe, celebrated pilot. Her record-breaking journeys were not motivated by comfort. They were driven by a desire to push boundaries, to see how far she could go. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison, rather than abandon his fight against apartheid. He endured pain and isolation, yet his will to resist, to stand for something larger than himself, ultimately transformed him into a leader who needed a nation.
Leonardo da Vinci spent decades obsessing over anatomy, engineering, and art, often abandoning projects when they didn't meet his impossible standards. His life was not easy, but his relentless pursuit of mastery left a legacy that shaped centuries. In each case, the individuals could have chosen safer, more comfortable paths. They didn't, because their lives were guided by something stronger than the avoidance of pain. Most of us are taught to see suffering as something bad that must be minimized. Nietzsche turned this view upside down. For him, suffering was not inherently negative. It was a necessary ingredient in the process of becoming stronger and more alive. He wrote, "To live is to suffer. To survive is to find some meaning in the suffering." This doesn't mean seeking pain for its own sake. It means understanding that pain is often the price of growth. Avoid it entirely, and you avoid becoming who you could be. Think of how muscles grow. They must be stressed, even torn on a microscopic level, to rebuild stronger. The same is true of character, skills, and resilience. Without challenge, there is no change. The key is to change the way we see discomfort. Most people treat pain as a signal to stop. Nietzsche suggests viewing it as feedback that you are stretching beyond your current limits. When you feel nervous before giving a speech, it's not a sign you should avoid public speaking forever. It's a sign that you're entering a space where growth can happen. When you feel the mental strain of learning a new language, it's not proof that you're failing. It's proof that your brain is forming new connections. Pain becomes destructive when it is meaningless. But when it is tied to purpose, to something you have chosen because you value the result, it becomes fuel. The will to power is not just about becoming stronger physically or mentally. It's about building a life that feels meaningful. Pleasure might make you comfortable for a day. Meaning can carry you through years of effort. A parent waking up every night to care for a newborn is not seeking pleasure. They are sacrificing comfort for love, growth, and a future they believe in. An entrepreneur working, through failure after failure, is not chasing short-term enjoyment. They are chasing a vision that matters more than ease. Nietzsche would argue that such people are not merely surviving. They are fully alive because they are expressing their will to power, their drive to shape life, not just endure it. Look at your own life. Where are you choosing comfort when you could be choosing growth? Where are you letting fear of pain keep you from something that might make you stronger? Do you avoid opportunities because they might lead to failure? Do you stick with routines that feel safe but leave you uninspired? Do you settle for good enough because great feels too risky? If so, Nietzsche would challenge you to question whether comfort is truly making you happy or simply keeping you small. The good news is that you already know how to endure discomfort. Every time you have learned something new, handled a setback, or recovered from loss, you have acted from the will to power. You may not have called it that, but you have felt it. Remember moments when you pushed through difficulty, finishing school despite doubts, getting back up after failure, or helping someone else even when it cost you time or energy. Those moments reveal that your capacity for growth is far greater than your desire for ease. The will to power is often imagined as something distant, almost mythical, something that belongs to philosophers, warriors, or historical figures who stand on the grand stage of history. But in reality, this force is present in the most ordinary moments of life. It is not confined to rare, heroic acts. It shapes daily choices, subtle decisions, and the quiet ways in which we either grow or retreat. Think of a simple morning. The alarm rings and you are tempted to stay in bed, to let comfort have its way. Yet there is another pull, a less comfortable one. The thought that getting up early could help you train, write, or prepare for something important. That second voice is the will to power. It is the part of you that urges movement when stillness feels easier, progress when safety offers its arms. You may ignore it at times, but it does not disappear. It waits, it whispers, and each time you listen, you become slightly more than you were before. This force is visible in the realm of work and ambition. Many people could, if they wished, settle for less responsibility, less pressure, and fewer demands. Yet countless individuals volunteer for challenges that bring with them anxiety, risk, and long hours. They apply for jobs they are not certain they can handle. They agree to lead projects that will test their patience and endurance. On paper, it looks irrational. Why choose what will make life harder? But deep inside, there is something that finds ease unsatisfying. The mind may crave comfort, but the deeper self craves growth, and growth never comes without resistance. Relationships show the same pattern. Human connection is not painless. To love, to trust, and to build something lasting with another person means opening yourself to conflict, misunderstanding, and even heartbreak. It would be far simpler to remain guarded, to keep conversations light, to never reveal what truly matters. Yet people risk discomfort and pain to form bonds that are real and profound. When they apologize instead of staying silent, when they have difficult conversations rather than avoiding them, they act not from the pursuit of immediate pleasure, but from the desire to become stronger, deeper, and more capable of giving and receiving love. This willingness to endure difficulty for the sake of a richer life is the will to power. at work. Learning provides another clear example. No one forces an adult to pick up a musical instrument, to begin studying a new language, or to write a book in the quiet hours of the night. These pursuits demand time, energy, and repeated failure. They bring frustration before they bring joy. If pleasure were the sole guiding force of human behavior, no one would choose such paths voluntarily. Yet countless people do. A child falls while trying to walk, stands up again, and falls once more. The process hurts, but the drive to stand is stronger than the instinct to avoid eyes pain. The same drive lives in adults who push through the early awkwardness of a skill, who tolerate slow progress and mistakes because they long to become more than they are. Creation and mastery feed something deeper than comfort ever could. Imagine the opposite life, the life without struggle. Someone chooses the easiest job available, avoids every risk, and spends each evening in front of a screen, seeking only quick satisfaction. At first, this seems pleasant. No pressure, no danger, no pain. Yet over time, a subtle emptiness creeps in. The days blur together. Achievements feel shallow or non-existent. Safety turns into stagnation. Nietzsche warned of this kind of existence when he described what he called the last man, a figure who avoids suffering so completely that he also avoids greatness, depth, and meaning. The last man survives but does not truly live. To live differently requires a choice. It requires recognizing that comfort is not always your friend. The will to power does not demand reckless self-destruction or endless struggle. It demands conscious decisions. It means looking at a difficult path and saying, yes, I will take it, because what I can become on the other side matters more than how easy this moment feels. A person who goes to the gym after an exhausting day, who chooses to face a tense conversation instead of pretending nothing is wrong, or who works late into the night to finish a project that truly matters, is answering the call of the will to power. Each choice to do what is hard for the sake of growth strengthens something inside, something that cannot be built any other way. The voice of this drive is often quiet. It rarely demands. It invites. It appears as a thought that excites and unsettles you at the same time. What if I tried that? What if I went further? What if I dared to believe I could do more? Almost instantly, another voice tries to shut it down. You are not ready. You could fail. It is too much effort. Stay safe. The struggle between these two voices plays out in countless daily situations. The will to power is the one urging you forward, while fear and comfort pull you back. Each time you step forward despite the resistance, you strengthen your own foundation. Resistance itself is a sign of where growth waits. Before a presentation, your hands shake. Before you start writing a book, you feel overwhelmed by self-doubt. Before you attempt something new, you feel the weight of hesitation. These moments can feel like warnings, but they are actually markers. They mean you are on the edge of expansion. The will to power thrives right there, pushing you toward the unknown, asking you to endure discomfort in exchange for transformation. This does not mean that only monumental actions count. Some of the most profound expressions of the will to power are small, invisible to others. Choosing to speak honestly when you usually hide your feelings. Trying something new in a quiet corner where no one will cheer. For you. Refusing to quit on a day when progress feels painfully slow. These acts build an internal strength that no one else can see, but you can feel it. Over time, it changes how you see yourself. You begin to trust your ability to act despite fear, to persist despite fatigue, and to adapt despite setbacks. Each small victory proves that pain can be a teacher instead of an enemy. Life begins to feel different when you live this way. It does not become easier. In fact, it remains full of challenges. But the challenges no longer feel like attacks to avoid. They feel like opportunities to shape yourself into someone stronger and more alive. Successes feel richer because they carry the memory of struggle. Even failures stop feeling like proof that you are weak. They become evidence that you dared to try when you could have stayed safe. There is a deep satisfaction in effort itself, a satisfaction that comfort can never provide. When you align your life with the will to power, you stop waiting for the world to remove all obstacles before you move forward. You begin to see that obstacles are part of the path, not detours from it. Pain is no longer just something to escape. It becomes something you can use. Fear is no longer just a signal to retreat. It becomes a signpost pointing toward the places where growth is waiting. And instead of asking, "How can I make my life easier?" you start asking, "How can I make my life fuller? How can I become more capable, more creative, more courageous?" In this way, ordinary days turn into opportunities for transformation. Each morning brings choices. Will you listen to comfort, or to that quieter voice calling you upward? Each evening reflects the result. Did you stay the same, or did you take one step closer to becoming more? The will to power is not distant, and it is not reserved for extraordinary people. It lives in you already, waiting for you to let it guide your next action, your next challenge, and the person you are becoming. When people first encounter the phrase will to power, they often interpret it in the most literal and superficial way, as a call to dominate others, to impose one's strength on the weak, to conquer, to control. This misunderstanding has shadowed Nietzsche's work for more than a century, twisting a concept that was meant to describe inner growth into something darker and more external. To truly understand what Nietzsche meant, it is necessary to strip away the historical distortions, cultural fears, and deliberate misuses that have clung to his words. Only then can we see the will to power as he intended, not as an excuse for tyranny, but as a profound insight into human potential and self-transformation. One of the biggest misconceptions stems from confusing the will to power with a hunger for class, political, or social domination. It is true that power in everyday language often means control over others, nations competing for influence, leaders commanding armies, or individuals manipulating those around them. But Nietzsche's idea reaches far beyond politics or interpersonal dynamics. For him, the will to power is not primarily about external conquest. It is about the inner force that drives living beings to expand, to grow, to overcome themselves. Plants express it when they push roots through stone and grow towards sunlight. Artists express it when they labor endlessly to create something that didn't exist before. Athletes express it when they push their bodies beyond familiar limits, not to defeat another person, but to become stronger versions of themselves. In each case, the focus is not on dominating others, but on transcending previous boundaries. This subtlety has often been lost in translation, sometimes literally. Nietzsche's unpublished notes, which his sister Elizabeth Förster Nietzsche compiled after his mental collapse, were edited in ways that had distorted his meaning. Elizabeth had political agendas of her own, aligning herself with nationalist and authoritarian movements of her time. She emphasized interpretations that made the will to power sound like a justification for hierarchy, racial superiority, and forceful rule. As a result, Nietzsche's philosophy was later misappropriated by ideologies he would have despised, including the propaganda of the Nazi regime. The man who wrote passionately against anti-Semitism, nationalism, and herd-like obedience became, through the manipulation of others, falsely associated with them. To see the will to power clearly, it helps to remember that Nietzsche rejected all systems that diminished individuality. He was deeply critical of mass thinking, blind conformity, and any moral code that discouraged personal strength, creativity, and courage. If he had wanted to encourage political domination or cruelty, he would have celebrated those who sought to rule over others. Instead, he mocked people who gained their sense of worth only by controlling the weak. In his eyes, that kind of power-seeking was actually a form of weakness, a symptom of insecurity, rather than a mark of true strength. Genuine strength, he argued, comes from mastering oneself, not from enslaving others. Another common misunderstanding is to equate the will to power with endless aggression or conflict, as though life must be a constant battle to prove superiority. Nietzsche did believe that struggle is central to growth, but not all struggle is against other people. Much of the struggle he described happens within, resisting the temptation to stay small, confronting your own fears, dismantling values you inherited rather than chose, and enduring pain that shapes you into someone more resilient. The enemy, in Nietzsche's thought, is often not an external opponent, but the parts of ourselves that cling to safety, comfort, and familiar illusions. This distinction becomes clearer when we look at Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, or overman. Many readers think of the Übermensch as a kind of superhuman conqueror, a being who dominates ordinary people. But Nietzsche's writings reveal a different picture. The Übermensch is someone who has overcome internal limitations, who has created their own values instead of passively accepting society's rules, and who has the courage to live authentically even when it means walking a lonely path. Such a person might lead others by example, but not by force. Their power comes from within. It radiates rather than imposes. A related misconception is that the will to power glorifies selfishness or cruelty. Because Nietzsche criticized traditional moral systems that emphasized humility, obedience, and self-sacrifice, some assume he advocated the opposite, unrestrained egoism, where people take what they want without regard for anyone else. But Nietzsche's work is more nuanced. He did not praise mindless self-indulgence. In fact, he viewed impulsive gratification as a lower, less evolved form of existence, a sign that a person is ruled by immediate desires rather than by a higher vision of what they could become. The will to power is not about grabbing whatever feels good in the moment. It is about shaping yourself into something greater, which often requires discipline, patience, and the ability to delay comfort for a more meaningful reward. Consider an artist who spends years refining their craft. They may sacrifice leisure, endure criticism, and work through frustration. Their actions are not selfish in the shallow sense, yet they are deeply self-centered in another sense. They are driven by the desire to bring something unique into the world, to express a personal vision. Nietzsche would call this an example of the will to power, not because the artist is harming anyone, but because they are asserting their inner strength against resistance. The same applies to a teacher who fights for better education, a scientist who spends decades on a difficult discovery, or an athlete who trains relentlessly. None of these acts require harming others. All of them require overcoming oneself. It is also important to address the fear that the will to power justifies harming those who are weaker. Nietzsche's writings show that he admired vitality, creativity, and strength, but he did not advocate cruelty as a way to achieve them. He believed that a culture obsessed with equality at all costs could suppress excellence, but he did not believe that greatness had to be built on the suffering of others. He criticized those who defined their identity only by what they opposed, those who felt powerful only when they had someone beneath them to blame, resent, or control. For Nietzsche, this reactive kind of power was small and bitter compared to the expansive power of someone who focuses on creating, building, and rising without needing to crush anyone else. To fully grasp Nietzsche's meaning, think of the will to power not as a social theory, but as a description of life itself. Every living thing seeks not just to survive, but to grow, to expand its influence, to express itself more fully. A tree does not harm the sky when it reaches upward. It simply fulfills its nature. A child does not steal from anyone when they learn to speak, walk, and assert independence. They are becoming who they are meant to be. In the same way, adults who pursue difficult goals, create art, challenge their own fears, or strive to leave a legacy are not necessarily seeking to dominate others. They are living expressions of a universal force that wants life to become more abundant, more capable, more aware. Understanding this helps us see why Nietzsche placed so much emphasis on self-overcoming. To him, the greatest battles are fought not on fields, but within our own hearts and minds. The hardest victories are the ones where we abandon comfortable illusions, face our own weaknesses, and choose growth even when it hurts. The person who can do that embodies the true spirit of the will to power. They do not need to shout, conquer, or destroy to feel strong. Their strength shows in their ability to create, to endure, and to rise again after every fall. By clearing away these misconceptions, the will to power becomes something very different from the caricature that history has often presented. It is not a philosophy for tyrants, nor an excuse for cruelty, nor a license for selfishness. It is a description of the force that makes life grow rather than shrink, that pushes individuals to expand rather than retreat, that urges each of us to move beyond what we were yesterday. When seen in this light, the will to power is not something to fear, but something to understand, to recognize, and perhaps even to embrace. The will to power is not merely a philosophical concept to be studied. It is a lens through which life itself can be lived. If Nietzsche was correct in saying that every living being possesses this underlying force, then to recognize it consciously is to gain the ability to direct it rather than be passively shaped by it. The question becomes, how can this force be harnessed for personal growth rather than allowed to dissipate through comfort, fear, or distraction? Living by the will to power begins with an internal shift. Most people are conditioned to seek safety, to avoid discomfort, and to view struggle as something to escape. Modern culture often reinforces this by equating happiness with ease, promoting ideas that a good life is one where everything is convenient, painless, and predictable. Nietzsche challenges that assumption. He suggests that what we truly crave, even if we are not always aware of it, is not a life free from difficulty, but a life in which our difficulties make us stronger. The will to power asks us to see resistance not as a wall, but as a ladder, each rung carved by the very challenges we often wish away. Imagine a person who desires to write a book, but constantly hesitates, telling themselves they need more time, better ideas, or perfect conditions. They wait for inspiration to strike, for life to become less busy, for fear of criticism to fade. In reality, none of those obstacles will ever fully disappear. The will to power demands action despite imperfection. It says, start now while you are afraid, while you are unsure, while the conditions are far from ideal. Because by acting, you become the kind of person who does not wait for life to make room for their dreams. They make room themselves. This is not an easy choice, but it is a transformative one. Each time a person acts despite hesitation, they strengthen the very mute skill that Nietzsche believed defines human potential. This principle applies to every aspect of life. Consider physical challenges, training for a kichiki, demanding race, lifting weights that seem impossible at first, or learning a sport that feels awkward and uncomfortable. At the beginning, the body resists. Pain, fatigue, and the temptation to quit appear quickly. Yet over time, those who persist find that what was once unbearable becomes manageable, then routine, then effortless. The will to power is visible in this process. It thrives on the tension between what we are and what we could become, using discomfort as a tool to bridge that gap. Emotional and mental growth follow the same pattern. A person who avoids conflict because they fear confrontation might maintain a superficial sense of peace, but underneath, they remain fragile. Their world shrinks because they cannot face uncomfortable conversations or assert their needs. Another person, guided by the will to power, chooses to face those moments, head-on, even trembling at first. They speak their truth, endure awkward silences, and learn from mistakes. Each difficult interaction strengthens them, teaching that fear loses its hold when met repeatedly. In time, what once felt terrifying becomes natural. Their relationships deepen because they are no longer controlled by avoidance. Strength grows silently, reshaping not only how others see them, but how they see themselves. A life shaped by the will to power does not chase comfort as its highest good. Instead, it seeks a deeper kind of satisfaction, the satisfaction that comes from becoming capable of more than you once thought possible. Imagine climbing a steep hill. At the bottom, the peak looks impossibly far. At the halfway point, your legs ache, your lungs burn, and part of you wants to turn back. Yet something inside refuses to quit. That something is the will to power. At the top, the view is not just beautiful because of the scenery. It is beautiful because of the struggle it required. You see the distance you covered, the pain you endured, and you realize you have changed. You are no longer the person who stood at the bottom. You are someone who climbs. But embracing this philosophy is not about reckless striving. Nietzsche never suggested that life should be a constant grind with no moments of rest or joy. True strength includes knowing when to recover, when to pause, and when to redirect your efforts. The will to power is not a demand to break yourself, but an invitation to shape yourself consciously. Growth does not require destruction. It requires balance. Moments of intensity followed by moments of reflection. Times of exertion followed by times of integration. Without rest, ambition turns into burnout. Without effort, rest turns into stagnation. The will to power thrives where there is rhythm, where challenge and recovery work together to build a life that is full rather than merely busy. To live by this principle also requires honesty. It demands that you stop pretending that avoidance equals peace. Avoidance might quiet fear for a moment, but it also prevents you from becoming who you could be. If there is a dream you keep postponing, a skill you have been too afraid to attempt, or a change you resist making because it seems too hard, then that is where the will to power is calling. Growth hides in the exact places where fear whispers, "Not now." The challenge is to listen to the deeper voice, the one that does not promise comfort, but promises transformation. Even pain itself changes meaning under this perspective. Most people view pain as an enemy, something to flee. But when seen through Nietzsche's lens, pain is often the sign that something important is happening. Muscles ache because they are getting stronger. Fear rises because you are stepping outside your old limits. As heartbreak hurts because you cared enough to risk connection. None of this pain is meaningless. It is the raw material from which strength is forged. The will to power teaches that suffering can either shrink you or shape you, and the difference depends on whether you choose to see it as an obstacle or as a tool. This does not mean that every struggle is worth enduring. There is a difference between pain that leads to growth and pain that destroys. Nietzsche's philosophy encourages self-overcoming, not self-harm. The key is to choose challenges that align with your higher goals rather than ones that drain you without purpose. Climbing a mountain builds strength. Running into a storm with no reason does not. The will to power thrives when your actions have meaning, when they contribute to becoming a stronger, wiser, more creative version of yourself. A person who lives by this philosophy begins to see life itself as a canvas for creation. They no longer measure success by comfort or external approval, but by how much they have expanded, their abilities, their courage, and their inner freedom. They begin to ask different questions, not how can I avoid pain, but what is worth enduring pain for? Not how can I stay safe, but what kind of person do I want to become? And most importantly, what can I do today, even if it is small, that moves me closer to that person? Over time, these choices accumulate. Small acts of courage build into habits. Habits shape character. Character shapes destiny. The will to power is not a single dramatic moment. It is a continuous thread, woven through ordinary days. Every time you resist the pull of comfort in favor of growth, you strengthen it. Every time you face what scares you instead of hiding, you align with it. And every time you turn pain into progress instead of retreat, you embody the very essence of Ni. Etche's vision, life not as something to endure passively, but as something to shape actively.